To have or not to have a new constitution is the crux of the conversation. That's why we brought in a legal mind, a senior legal mind, senior advocate of Nigeria, Mr. Candide-Johnson, joins us via Zoom. Let us say thank you so much and good to see you, sir, on the program.
Good morning. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure.
I want you to maybe start from some of the things and the remarks by the group called The Patriot, led by Chief Emeka Anyaoku. Literally, if we infer, he's trying to say, look, whatever it is we're doing, all of the things we're dealing with, whether it's economy or security and all of this, these are just symptoms of a bigger problem for him, the rewriting or redrafting of the Constitution. Is that what you see from where you sit?
I think that this is a very distinguished group and that their thoughts on the organization of our society are very important. I think that there's some critical points that they made. Some of the points, some of the conclusions they reached may be debatable, but fundamentally to your question, I think that the organization of power and the distribution of resources within any political society is a matter that can be arranged by a constitution. So to the extent that that is persistently problematic for us, looking at the Constitution may be a helpful way to try and resolve some of these issues.
And so if you look at some of the issues raised, they raise the issue of insecurity, I think the issue of the economy. How can a new constitution help us address it, that this present one we're dealing or we're using as a working grown norm and document is not helping us to achieve that purpose?
I think that we often make a mistake when we talk about constitution as if we're lawyers and we talk about a written document and enacted law. This is why I remember listening partly to Chief Anyaoku. He said the 1999 constitution was illegitimate. I found that pronouncement to be problematic because a constitution is a political and social arrangement. It's an agreement between the people in an organized political society as to how they will regulate relationships between themselves and relationships between themselves and those who govern them. So it's every political protest, as you saw protests recently in Nigeria, is the beginning of a negotiation. Every stakeholder in any political society has peculiar interests, and the price we pay for political stability and ipso facto for the progress in the economy, etc., is in including as many people as possible. The greater diversity you can encompass in a pluralistic society, the more likely you ought to have a stability. So the Constitution, therefore, is a device, and maybe you could say that those who control power pay the price in the Constitution of limiting their own powers and organizing and making clear to all those who participate in that political society that there are rules, there are arrangements, and these arrangements can be seen to give a fair opportunity to as wide a group of people as possible. One of your earlier speakers I just listened to spoke about the youth. The truth is that 60% of Nigeria's population are under 30, but then the majority of political power is in the hands of a more aged elite. Same thing, a majority of Nigerians are women, but then you will find that in political participation, the role of women is limited. What that means is that there is no access for a great majority of Nigerian populace to be heard, to feel included in the power distribution in Nigeria. And that is a source of instability. If you have political instability, you're going to have a dangerous contest for power, which is going to result in violence, often in these extended protests, in discontent, and lack of a joint or collaborative contribution to the future progress of the country. So it's about inclusion. You have to give people the idea that the devices for regulating power and distributing power and resources is one in which they feel they have a fair chance.
Mr. Johnson, when you compare the past, maybe let's talk about the outcomes of past constitutional conferences. When you compare it to what is happening now and the call for a new constitution, do you think that a difference can actually be made when you talk about the outcome, if it were positive or negative, looking at what is going on right now? What do you think will be different this time?
I'm not so sure that just by declaring a constituent assembly, you're going to make things different. I think that what will make things different is in recognizing the task at hand. If you look at the constitutional history of Nigeria, every country needs a constitution, however you call it. The United Kingdom has a constitution which is not written. but it's a constitution nonetheless. By a series of conventions and arrangements and recognized legal procedures, they organize their society in a way that allows participation. And the history of the UK, which is a country from which we owe a lot of our own legal origins, shows that the constitutional arrangements have evolved over time as a result of a succession of agitations. It's still within memorable history that there was rigging of elections. It's still within legal history that they had rotten boroughs where for 100 years the same family controlled the elections and the representation in that constituency. And then they had a series of political events, including the Peterloo massacres, where people wanted the reduction of the price of bread, for example. But I use that as an example because that political society has evolved by making constitutional adjustments from the absolutism of the king to the complete regulation and the subordination of the king to political authority. So the point is that you have to recognize that what you're trying to do is to define a model which arises from the experience, from the values and the aspiration of the society you want to regulate. Another one of your speakers earlier on spoke about what happens in Czechoslovakia or in the United States or in Germany or in Canada or in India is works for them. What we have to do in Nigeria, I think that it's a mistake to simply say we want to revert to the 1960 Constitution or 1963 Constitution, models which were examined and negotiated at the particular time. Even constitutional arrangements must evolve. So if you look at the Nigerian constitutional history, 1951, so many people regard the 1951 Constitution as the most representative because a wide and detailed consultation across the nation was engendered. Chief Bola Ige criticized the 1960 Constitution, which many people consider to be so beautiful, as being defective in that it did not arise from a wide and democratic consultation of the people. You have to ask the people, what are your fears? What are the dangers you want to protect against? What will make you feel included in this society? What are you afraid of? In 1958, there was the famous Willing Commission was asked before Nigeria's 1960 Constitution to examine the problem of minorities. The problem of minorities was regarded as a potential explosive device in the constitutional arrangements of Nigeria. Because if minorities feel excluded, they're going to constitute a force for division within the nation. And in Nigeria, everybody in some way is a minority. If you don't recognize the rights of minorities and you don't give a nod or some sort of deference to them, you're going to have a time bomb which is going to explode from time to time. So it's very important to recognize and regulate that. And the recommendation of the Willing Commission was a legal one. It said that if you give people basic rights and you acknowledge basic rights and you have an independent and impartial judiciary, then people will feel confident that they can be defended, their rights, their prospects, their hopes, the lives of their children, their safety, their security can be regulated by a system which is rational, which is accessible, and which is effective. And this is the challenge. So you have to ask people what they want. You can't create. So another one of your speakers, a lot of very interesting points they made, spoke about elite capture. This is a great danger. When great men speak down from the Olympian heights and tell you what type of constitution they need or what type of constitution the nation needs, there is a great problem and a danger that I see activated because they do not and cannot represent the plurality of Nigerian society. They have to ask them, and they have to be humble enough to accept that their opinions and thoughts may not be the ones that prevail, but that every political agitation is the beginning of a negotiation. You must find out what people want, and then you must reach a deal. A constitution is the result of that consultative process. If you don't have wide participation, activation of people about their own rights, about their own needs, then there's going to be explosion and there are going to be time bombs along the path of your constitutional progress.
Well, and this is not to raise people's hopes unnecessarily, because we've been here before. And this is not to even say the government has said, yes, we'll go ahead with this, even though, well, when the people ask for some things, it's expected that government, which is acting on behalf of government, would do those things. But you talked about young people, which is a major part of this conversation. We're very big on young people, not just because we're young people, but young people are clearly the ones that will live with this constitution for longer. So in terms of getting representation, which you also talked about, the proposal from the group is a constituent assembly, not a demographic assembly. Maybe you have representation across ages. So how do we ensure that if this goes through as it ought to, or as it is proposed rather, that we have the representation the right way, what kind of model would you recommend, if at all you don't mind doing that?
Well, first of all, if you create a constituent assembly, the question that you face is how do you populate it? If you look at what they did in Kenya, every member of the existing National Assembly was a member of the Constituent Assembly because they are a vested interest and they are a political stakeholder group which is powerful and which is highly influential. You cannot cut out the existing powers. So when you say that the Constitution is illegitimate, this is a mistake, because in constitutional law, there's nothing that succeeds like success. The test of a constitutional arrangement is effectiveness. And if people are governing today under an existing legal document, that document cannot be legitimate because it is achieving real results in the constitutional field and constitutional law. So you have to acknowledge those. Then you have to say to yourself, what level and mechanisms for participation do I need? In 1951, they had town halls, they had chiefs calling their councils, they had local government arrangements, they had these were not necessarily, political parties were not as involved at that stage, but these were not necessarily party political events. The challenge, the key test is how do you consult people and how do you bring the result of that consultation into one organized event. Now, the Constituent Assembly, how do you bring those people? Well, many people have distrust of the electoral practices in Nigeria. So if you say you want to elect people to a Constituent Assembly, people are going to say it's going to be rigged. And that may well be the case. So there are many models that many countries have used. You can say we're going to put part of the National Assembly that exists. We're going to ask stake interest holder groups to nominate traditional rulers, women, youth, a variety of people. It's something that requires some thought. I noticed that Chief Anyoku talked about creating a Constituent Assembly and asking 7 lawyers from geopolitical zones to advise. It's really more than that. It is the plebiscite which he refers to at the end of the process is in fact something that must be investigated before the beginning of the process. We need to find a way, even in determining how we constitute a Constituent Assembly, we have to create a body whose authority will be so implicitly accepted by and adhered to voluntarily by the wide majority that it will have power to make change. Because there is an existing legal order. And what you're doing by trying to upturn the Constitution and create a new one is to revoke the existing legal order. You cannot do that except by bloodshed or violence without consultation. You have to find a device by which you include those who hold power today. You have to make it clear to them that the continuity of societal progress, their political stability, and the future of the country depend on their expanding the base of power. They have to recognize that it's in their own interest to do so. This requires intricate negotiation, and it requires a formulaic approach to devices which would do that. So there's a lot of work to be done. The fact that a great group like this makes this proposal and they bring this to the presence of the president means that a great political event has been heralded. Now, to do the work which will make it effective, we now have to think very carefully about how we achieve that. I want to hear from youth what they think. I can't possibly imagine what the youth think. I can't possibly put myself in the position of women and decide what they think is valuable and what is important. Is it their land rights? Is it right to succession? Is it political power? Is it economic power? These are all stakeholder groups whose voices must be heard. The challenge is to find devices to bring those voices into this process and to put them in a Constituent Assembly.
All right, let's also explore one other, what we call the major fault line, ethnicity and tribalism, religion, because those are alibis that politicians took during the election cycle, and everybody seemed to run to those places as alibis, especially ethnic nationality. I want you to maybe speak to how we can, just like you spoke about women and the young people. Some are proposing that the best way is to speak to or bring to the table the ethnic nationalities who are quote unquote owners of the country within their own different blocks.
You can't ignore fault lines. You can't ignore perspectives which may not be your own. I was in a conversation, or I was listening to a conversation a couple of days ago about people talking about areas of the country which feel they're marginalized and that they're victims of tribal recrimination. Now, I do not belong to that particular group. So I must recognize that they have a right to be heard, because unless I want to remove them from my political society, I must accept that their grievance is a legitimate cause for discussion, a legitimate occasion for discussion, and that every person's right and fear must be negotiated. We cannot ignore tribe in Nigeria, because the history of our constitution and political progress is that a lot of political activity has been organized around ethnic groups, around religious groups. I mean, even if you go to a social function in Lagos, you're going to find people sitting in groups that are similar to those ones that we discussed. But they're in the same place. We can sit down in the same place and we can recognize that we have differences, but you have to ask people. Again, it's about interrogation and investigation. Is it possible to say that an Igbo man from Abia State has needs and ideals that are so violently different from those of a Hausa Fulani from Kano or a Yoruba from Oshobo, that they cannot live in the same community? I don't think that is so, because there are basic needs that people have. They have need for life. They have need for shelter. They have need for food. They have need to feel safe for the future of their children. Those are fundamental needs. What makes people resort to ethnicity and religion as a defense for those rights is the fact that those rights are not available to them by the virtue of their citizenship in a political society. So this is the problem. It's a lack of exclusion. It's a feeling of alienation that causes people to go back to the bunker of their origins. If I can't be protected in the federation, then I'm going to go back to my state. You have to feel safe. So you extract the things that people care for, the things that people are afraid about. You have to explore their experiences and give a nod to the fact that you may not understand, having not walked in their own shoes. What are you afraid of, I keep saying? What would make you feel safe within this federation? What is the danger? What is the historic grievance that you have which has not been expressed? Can I hear it? Oh, I see. Because you cannot shut people down. The freedom of speech, freedom of expression, these are part of the price we pay for stability in our political society. If you shut people up, they will go quiet, they will go underground, and they will continue to threaten the stability of your political order. So it's very important. We cannot ignore those things. And the more people have the responsibility to speak about them in public, don't speak about your grievances as a Yoruba and Igbo and a Hausa Fulani only amongst your people. Have the confidence to speak about what you feel in a public and open space. Because some people don't know, and some people haven't walked in your shoes. But you have a right to be heard. You have a right for your grievance to be included in the political arrangements. The sharing of power and the sharing of resources is how we protect people's fears and anxieties and how we guarantee the stability of our society. This is the foundation of a constitution. Again, as a lawyer, I should divorce myself from the presumption many lawyers have that a constitution is about sections and about paper. A constitution is a social and a political arrangement between peoples living in a political territory, and the purpose of it is to regulate their behavior amongst themselves, distribute power in a way that is most effective to achieve a widest commitment to the ideals of that nation.
Mr. Johnson, we've talked a lot about inclusion and getting everybody to talk about this and what they want and all of that. But again, Nigeria has a population of over 200 million people. If we're saying that everyone has to have a voice, it means children should be involved, religious leaders should be involved, we as citizens should be involved, every sector of Nigeria, every human, women, and everyone. So I know you talked about creating a platform where everyone can be heard. So if you were to give a legal advice on how this can work so that everyone's voice is heard, what would be the immediate step that should be taken right now to make sure that everyone is included, every voice is heard? At least in the Constitution, it creates a platform where everyone is involved.
You know, yeah, this is just spitballing, as they say, but I would create a minister for constitutional reform. I would give him a team to frame a series of questions about, in the context of our experience, our values, our fears, and anxieties. And I would organize national discussions in the press, in political societies, in political parties, about fundamental questions that Nigerians want to know about. What type of land ownership will make me feel I belong to Nigeria? What type of rights? Children, how do we protect children? Do we protect them against exploitation, against trafficking, against marriage? There's a wide variety of issues which can be framed into a number of discussion points. I would activate discussion amongst those points. I mean, if the government is talking about people's concerns, they're not going to go to the streets to express them. They're going to express them in the fora that have been created to express them. Lack of opportunity for expression is what spills protest onto the streets. Even people we don't like have views and have rights as long as they remain within our society. So I would activate a series of discussions, and I would create a pipeline for those discussions to become proposals for the structuring of our constitution and political arrangements. And then I would engage the existing political powers, including the National Assembly. You see, if there's leadership in the government and there's desire to promote these ideas, they can drive it. The president and governors are powerful bully pulpits. If they talk about something, people are going to respond. And they have to be willing to hear things that they don't like. It requires some maturity. This is why people who create constitutions are very big people. The people who created the American Constitution in Philadelphia, in their convention, I don't think they were up to 100 people. But then they came there with the views and the hopes of a largely homogenous society. But even a heterogeneous society has to have people who can speak for it. And we have to be willing, again, to hear things that we don't like. You know, one thing that Nigerians have insisted upon over the years in constitutional discussions, because of our own history of the Civil War, is that the unity of Nigeria is non-negotiable. You know, I accept that the unity of Nigeria must be preserved, but I don't accept that the unity cannot be negotiated, because the terms upon which a nation is united is what makes the union perfect. So let's not confuse the fact that we will not dissolve the nation with the fact that we can discuss how we make the union more perfect. That, again, is a familiar expression, making a more perfect union, because you have to realize that people's needs, fears, anxieties change, and that we have to negotiate the means by which we bring all these units together.
All right, so one of the questions that people have raised in the past, which I would like you to speak to with the Constitution, is the fact that some have said, how do we even replace the Constitution? Some have said, Section 4 gives us a room or gives the National Assembly some room to effect this process. I want you to speak to the legal backing as to how to replace a Constitution.
Okay, well, that's very interesting because creating a Constitutional Assembly is creating a body which, by legal definition, subverts the existing legal order, because it is going to, if you want to replace the Constitution. But again, though the device may be difficult, an aphorism which always comes to my mind when I talk about constitutional issues is one that is valuable here. In constitutional law, nothing succeeds like success. If you can achieve it and it's a political exercise, if you can achieve a political result which sticks, it is constitutional. That is very clear. Any constitutional scholar will tell you that. So we have an existing legal order. We have a National Assembly operating under a specific constitution. They can amend the constitution. In Kenya, the Supreme Court held that you cannot amend the constitution by replacing it. No Nigerian court has held that. So one potential device is that if a new constitution is agreed, the National Assembly would pass a law to adopt that constitution and effectively dissolve itself. It could be an interim National Assembly pending when the new constitution is brought into effect. But the fact is that if you change the constitution and you recognize that, somebody must enact the new constitution. And, you know, we dwell on the fact that 1999, 1979 constitutions were enacted by a military government, but that was the existing sovereign power. The 1960 constitution was enacted by the House, by the British Parliament. That itself was not a Nigerian people. That was an existing sovereign authority over this territory. So somebody has to exercise sovereign power to enact a constitution. And if we defer to a constituent assembly, that will be effective. If the National Assembly says the Constitutional Assembly has been constituted on the laws that we created, they've come with a document and we adhere to that document. We now pass a law creating a new constitution, and that when that constitution comes into effect within 6 months, this National Assembly shall stand dissolved and shall be replaced by a new National Assembly. That would be effective. If it has political authority, in constitutional law, it will have legal and constitutional authority. So you can tinker with that, but fundamentally, you must create a series of legal processes by which the existing sovereign yields power to a new sovereign power by some sort of legal event. And the nature of legal events requires not a high level of ingenuity, but it requires, above all, political commitment and support.
All right. We must thank you so much, Leonard Silk, for bringing this perspective on this particular issue. It's an ongoing conversation. So minds like yours will always be invited to bring clarity to all of us as much as possible. Thank you so much, Mr. Yemi Candide-Johnson, Senior Advocate of Nigeria. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much.
Well, we will take a quick break. When we come back, we will not be talking constitution. We'll be talking about a cause, a very important cause for the welfare of people that need it. Join us again.